ahead, I would now invite Namdi to introduce our next panel. Namdi, the floor is all yours.
Just in case, in the interest of time, since Namdi may have some problems with the sound, Momuksha, if you want, you can announce the final panel.
Lotus, Namdi is here.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'm in the room now.
Yeah, Namdi, please go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. And we would have our next panel, trying to make sure all our panelists are actually on the screen and they're live. So I can confirm Johnson Chang, try and confirm other people who should be here. Just give us a sec. Yeah, I can confirm Hashim. Hi, Hashim. Welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Namdi.
Yeah. Just a second. I think yeah, I can confirm Dr. Obi Ezekwesili. Welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Namdi.
Here. I can confirm Anindo. Anindo, welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
Finally, I can confirm Timothy Heyman and Mr. Shaw.
I don't see my picture.
Okay.
You guys see me there, or can you hear me?
Yeah, Mr. Shaw, I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's great. So we're all live now. So welcome to this panel. This is the last panel for the conference. It's been a very wonderful conference so far. And just to give us a bit of an idea of what we're going to talk about. So today, we're going to follow up with the conversation that we've been having, and this panel is going to be discussing on the theme, a day after, a view from emerging markets and beyond. The emerging markets has been uniquely impacted by the global crisis over the past few months. This year, emerging markets struggled through global financial crisis and a pandemic. The long-term effects of the latter, which is the pandemic, is still yet to be seen. However, this decade has also been one of tremendous milestones and growth for countries altogether in the emerging markets. Some of them will actually see massive developments, like China and a couple of other countries within the emerging markets. So our panelists today are going to discuss the past and the future of emerging economies, the good and the bad, the struggles and the hopes, some of the most diverse and dynamic nations in the world. To moderate this panel would be Timothy Heyman. Timothy is the president of Franklin Templeton Asset Management Mexico. From 1997, he developed Heyman y Asociado as a leading institutional investment manager in Mexico. And in 2013, merged it with Franklin Templeton Investments, which is one of the largest asset management companies listed on the New York Stock Exchange, with a market cap of over 9.6 billion. So now I will pass it on to Mr. Timothy to introduce the other panelists. I will take it from there.
Thank you very much, Namdi, and good day to everybody from Mexico City. I'm sitting here looking out at the Anthropology Museum, if any of you know Mexico City. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Lourdes. Thank you very much for inviting me. We're going to talk about then emerging markets the day after, the view from emerging markets and beyond. It's my honor and pleasure to moderate a panel from 4 continents, most extraordinary mixture of countries, backgrounds, experience, knowledge, and success. in alphabetical order, we've got Johnson Cheng from Hong Kong. I guess it's 1 a.m. there. Anindo Dutta from Singapore. I guess it's also 1 a.m. It's the same time zone. Then we've got Hashim Al-Dandarawi from Cairo. We've got Dr. Obi. Very nice to meet you suddenly, Dr. Obi from Lagos. And then we've got Yukiang Shao, who, despite his name, he's living in Westchester. I'm just saying it's a Chinese name. So we have 4 continents, which is Asia, Africa, the Americas, Europe, because of my accent. The only continent we don't have is Australia. Now, I think that what we have in common is that we're all people inside the emerging markets. We're living and acting within these markets, and presumably both influenced by and having an effect on these markets. And I think the framework, which I've already discussed with the panelists, is basically to think of the 10 years which we're celebrating in the EMI Emerging Markets Institute. Where have all the markets you operate in, what has happened, and then how have they faced the ultimate stress test, which is COVID? And what you see in the future in your distinct countries and your sectors. I'd like to make it very broad, but within that context, and my suggestion is that each of you take 10 minutes in alphabetical order to present, and then we'll go to questions both from me, the other panelists, and from the audience. So that will be the modus operandi. So I would ask Johnson Cheng to begin, please.
Well, thank you so much, Tim. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. This is Johnson. I'm a double Cornellian, CAUS 09 and MBA 2014. I'm the founder of Qifan Group, a venture investment firm, and Voyager Capital, a private equity firm that primarily invests in AI and enterprise SaaS startups. My family and our clients have deployed over 120 million US dollars in tech, real estate, loans, equities, and bonds across Asia. First, I want to thank Professor Lourdes Casanova and the Cornell Emerging Markets Institute for including me on this panel. Today, I'll share about 3 things: challenges in emerging markets during COVID, reasons for hope, and what you can do. Challenges. And to quote Professor Lourdes and my friend Bernard Yee, who's an IT executive and my mentor, this is the best of times, and this is the worst of times for emerging markets. Emerging markets have taken a huge hit to their economies and public health due to COVID-19, and some are still struggling to contain the rise in confirmed cases while trying to keep the economy afloat. And undoubtedly, COVID-19 has exacerbated what I call the 3 divides, chasms that left unfixed could wreak havoc to the very fabric of international and economic order. First, the divide between the rich and the poor, or commonly known as income inequality. Even if we ignore the fact that billionaires see fortunes rise by 27% during the pandemic, as reported by the BBC, we've seen students from poor families in emerging markets falling behind in schoolwork just because they don't have Wi-Fi at home or appropriate internet setup for Zoom. It's so easy for us to use Zoom and we take it for granted. Yet we forget how fortunate we are compared to those without regular high-speed internet access. Frontline staff in retail, hospitality, and restaurant businesses can't really work remotely, and many emerging markets rely heavily on tourism, which has been decimated during COVID. The second divide I call the divide between the Trump-led Western liberal democracies and China. The political rhetoric and actual animosity and suspicion between the 2 spheres, if you will, stand in the way of forming a global coordinated response to the pandemic. And the third divide is between the traditional and the digital economy. Traditional businesses that relied on natural resources and manufacturing plants suffered tremendously during COVID because of lockdowns. And while companies that are digital native, such as Zoom and Slack, etc., have soared in revenue and stock performance, digitization will be very disruptive to the traditional economy, and this is accelerated by COVID. But nonetheless, there is reason for hope. And here's why. Emerging economies have accounted for almost 2/3 of the world's GDP growth and more than half of new consumption over the past 15 years. There are 5 key drivers, and I'll go over them very quickly, that provides me reasons for hope. The first, population growth. The combined population of emerging markets is projected to swell by about 1 billion over the coming decade. And in many of these countries, the populations remain relatively young, such as India. Second, the rise of consumer class. Annual household private spending in emerging markets is rising nearly 3 times faster than in advanced markets. Third, rapid urbanization. More than 500 million people have moved from countryside to urban areas in emerging markets since 2007, and this trend is not stopping. The shift is fueling surging demand for services and housing and trillions of dollars in infrastructure investment. 4 is digital leapfrogging, and our panelists will talk more about this. More than 2.6 billion people in emerging markets use the internet, and consumers in those markets are among the world's most digital savvy. And 5th, and this is also the one reason I'm most familiar with, this year, the Chinese economy is steadily picking up, as evidenced by the positive overall growth in the first 3 quarters, despite COVID, including a 0.7% growth in foreign trade and a 5.2% growth in paid-in foreign investment. This is a major contribution to economic recovery amongst emerging markets and in the world. President Xi mentioned recently that China will stay committed to openness, cooperation, and unity for win-win results. His aim is to turn the Chinese market into a market for the world, a market shared by all and a market accessible to all. And most importantly, he raises the prospect of doubling China's GDP by 2035. By collaborating with China, emerging markets can have access to 5G infrastructure, the $1 trillion mainland China market, and much needed investment capital. So given those reasons for hope, what can you do? And I've summarized them into what I call the 4 I's. First is to investigate, to find out what is really happening on the ground, gather intelligence for yourself and see for yourself what's really happening. Where are the customer pain points and inefficiencies? Second, innovate. It's always prime time for innovation, especially when the going gets tough. It's a lot easier for small companies to build the innovation muscle and experiment with new products, adopt new cloud technologies, and innovate. Make sure you have a strategy to collect, analyze, and act on data as well. And emerging markets are full of energetic, aspirational, industrious entrepreneurs. The pitch competition that we just saw is a testament to the innovative and entrepreneurial talent in emerging markets. Governments and companies will benefit tremendously from leveraging and empowering this valuable asset. Third, invest. Invest in tech companies with presence in emerging markets, especially in ASEAN, I recommend. We invested in FiscalNote, the largest legal tech startup in the States that aggregates global bills and legislations on one platform and provides analytics using AI. Essentially, it's the Bloomberg for legislations. The company is expanding rapidly in South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, India, and Greater China. We've also invested in Green Monday, a plant-based food tech giant in Asia, pushing the adoption of alternative protein. VCs are also looking for local startups that will likely to become unicorns, following the example of the equivalents in China and the States. An example of this would be Grab. We see AI, ed tech, food tech, and smart healthcare to be interesting sectors to look at. And the last I is impact. Use this opportunity of COVID to make an impact on the community around you. I've learned that a family business in Colombia offered underprivileged kids lunches for under €1 and kept alive people, restaurants, and hotels. And this is a time to make a tangible impact on people's lives, and they need you. In conclusion, COVID has been tough on emerging markets, but we remain bullish on the potential of emerging markets in a post-COVID world. We can all investigate, innovate, invest, and make an impact. And last but not least, I always cherish my Cornell connection, and I think Cornellians would do well in those emerging markets by connecting and collaborating with each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Johnson. Well, I must say I really approve of the way you set the scene, and I love the way you present 5 drivers and 5 eyes, because most minds we can't hold more than 5 ideas in our head at a time. So I think that's a wonderful way of presenting things. So we now move on to Anindo Dutta. We're going in alphabetical order to talk on his view of emerging markets.
Thank you, Timothy. Team, great to be here. Let me start by first saying great to connect on this platform. Thank you, Lourdes and the EMI team. I am also a proud Cornellian from the Johnson School, did my executive MBA, and now this is my 3rd stint in Asia in the last decade. So it just goes to show you the promise of Asia Pacific and kind of building upon what Johnson said earlier. So I want to touch on the concept of divide, right? And Johnson talked about various aspects of the divide, but particularly the digital divide that we see. The last 10 years has certainly helped to bridge that, and I'll explain kind of what I mean by that. But given COVID, it has also exposed a lot of the vulnerabilities that still exist in Asia around the digital divide. The good news is I also offer a perspective on how we can bridge the divide through digital ecosystem partnerships, etc. But let me just give you some quick data points. So while it's true that we've transformed a lot, specifically in Asia Pacific, with digital transformation, fintech, ag tech, etc., yet one of the facts still is, this is according to a UN study, 52% of the region's 4.3 billion people still don't have access to kind of the basic internet infrastructure, let alone some of the digital transformation impacts that they could leverage. So there's still a big chasm to cross in terms of the haves and the have-nots. That's point number one. Second, in terms of what the impact COVID has created, you know, it's great to have kids not have to go to school and work from home, but in situations where the kids and the families are below a certain economic status, they can't even do remote learning or access to telehealth care, etc. So it creates a real challenge despite all the progress made in the last 10, 20 years. So what are we doing about this? What can be done about this? First, it's very encouraging to see the formation of kind of a public-private partnership, specifically the Asia Foundation for the ASEAN countries in conjunction with Google. So here's kind of an ecosystem that's getting built up, specifically sponsoring and building up the Asia Pacific Information Superhighway, right? And it's certainly a multi-year journey sponsored by many UN agencies, but public-private partnership is going to be a key driver as step one in kind of helping to bridge the divide. Second, you have a lot of the government initiatives. We're seeing tremendous boosts in countries like Nepal. They have an e-commerce platform called Kulti, and they're specifically targeting women who are now ready to re-enter the workforce or are getting re-skilled. So you have these pockets of excellence that are emerging. We see the same in Indonesia, the use of AI tools in the concept of ag tech for agriculture. So there's a whole push by various governments to kind of really radicalize and become very modern in their approach to help with the digital chasm, if you will, to cross the chasm. And the third one is specifically around what we can do with companies, right? There's a program, ST Microelectronics, just as a large corporation, has a digital unify program that is helping specifically targeted segments. So for example, in Malaysia, there's a high refugee population. How do we impart digital literacy skills? How do we enable them to kind of provide all of the basic skills and training? So there's a lot going on in this space. However, this is a reality that we see still exists. And together, I think we have to be able to cross this divide that exists in the digital space, so that unfortunately, or for the next COVID to hit, and I hope it doesn't, we'd be much better prepared. So I'll stop there, Tim. Just want to provide some perspectives on what we can do to bridge the divide and offer up some ideas.
Great, Ananda. Well, I think you're amazingly awake, given it's 5 to 2 in the morning in Singapore. He's really very lively. Now we'll go back to more civilized time zone, which is Cairo. We go to Hashem El Dandara. I had a wonderful talk with him 2 days ago and about what's going on in Cairo, but he's going to give us the view from Cairo. I guess you're looking out at the pyramids, no?
Not really. I'm looking at the screen for the time being. But anyway, thank you, Tim. I'm just going to try to bring in the experience from Egypt as an emerging market. I just would like to start by a little bit of background of what I do. I have a security company that's operating in Egypt and Africa and some parts of Europe. I believe that we have been successful in applying the 4 I's of Jonathan. We investigated the pain point of where the customer doesn't like it. We innovated in our operating model. And we invested in people and tech companies to support our digital transformation. And finally, being a person from Upper Egypt, which is one of the areas that are economically challenged, we support our community through education and job creation. But being from Egypt, I just would like to bring about the experience of Egypt into these times and work on the history of where we've been. I mean, Egypt is a transcontinental country bordering Asia, Africa, and Europe. So that made it a melting pot for different cultural backgrounds, but they live in a harmonious, stable manner. And being an emerging market, we have our own shared share of challenges. One, we have no resources, almost very limited resources, and we have a population of 100 million that is growing 1.9% every year. I mean, almost 2 million person every year. So that puts pressure on whatever development the country has. And last but not least, 10 years ago, we had a revolution, not one, but 2 revolutions. But because of the resilience of the Egyptian people, we were able to come back on track and manage to rise back to economic growth of 5.6 and be nominated one of the best performing emerging markets. Basically, what we're here faced with now is the mother of all disruptions. We just when we thought that everything is okay and we're moving forward, COVID-19 hits us, and with 30% of the workforce is a day-to-day job. 70% of the economy is informal economy, 90% of which is micro, small, and medium enterprise. So you could imagine what economic effect that COVID-19 had for it. I'll have to borrow what Rostom Desai said yesterday. He was describing China, and he said, to accelerate change, you need a strong leadership, you need the unity among people, and you need a dire need. And that's exactly what we had. I believe that the COVID-19 and the pressure that it put on countries developed and underdeveloped alike, needs a quality of leadership that is strong, agile, growth-oriented, and realistic. And that's exactly what we had here. Luckily, but to the point that in a population of 100,000 or 100 million, we had only 100,000 deaths out of COVID-19, which is considerably a small amount, a small number. But at the same time, the government and the society at large was put at a challenge. This was, like you said, a stress test, and we needed to kind of innovate in the way we approach things. Of course, because of the 5.6% growth that we have enjoyed, we have had a cushion that would support whatever the government would want to do to alleviate the pressure of poverty. So they extended the blanket of social, the poorest segments of the society. They injected some cash into the market. They lowered interest rates. They give tax holidays. They even give some tax incentives for companies that are hiring people at this tough time. So basically, the government was able to weather things around. But that comes to the main title of the panel is like the day after. So now what do we do? I believe that emerging markets are facing a new emerging reality. The fourth industrial revolution is a fact now, and the digital transformation is not a choice. And every country, and I'm talking about Egypt and the countries that are in the same position as Egypt, should adopt the digital transformation. And I believe that what we managed so far is that the government should support the infrastructure for that digital transformation. And as far as the Egypt has done, they have worked on the internet speed and they increased the speed 6-fold, which is something that we all had issues with. The network and the spread of internet was widespread among different governments to support the education system. We do have challenges, and especially in the inequality, like again, Jonathan said that there is a digital inequality. Some students weren't able to follow the exams and follow the courses. And this is one thing that I believe that we still have major challenges with. The second thing is for a country to have a digital transformation, they need the proper skill sets. And Egypt should build its own skill sets to support this digital transformation. There are a lot of efforts done in capacity building, but I think in a population of 100 million, we're blessed with a young population, like 60% of the population is under 30 years old. So it's a young population, eager to learn. And if we provide the right tools for it, I think that we have a chance of having a good engaged generations. On the other hand, if we're talking digital, the government needs to digitize its services. So far, only 23 government services has been digitized. They have a plan for another 70 next year, but it's still a long way to go. I would imagine that the most important thing is to build the innovative capital in the country through forwarding and pushing support to entrepreneurs, especially those that are tech savvy, that will provide solutions for pain points within the society, whether it's on the environmental side or on the logistical side. And if we can manage the coming period as we were able to manage it now, I would imagine that we have a chance of seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. I will stop here. Thank you.
Okay, well, Hashim, that was extremely interesting to, first of all, hear a bit about the background in your country and about how all these global trends are affecting your own country, Egypt. We move on now to Dr. Obi, who has been education minister and was the presidential candidate of the year. And I'm extremely interested to learn from you about Nigeria and the context of what's going on in the world. Obi, over to you.
Well, thank you so very much. And what a pleasure to listen to very interesting submissions by my co-panelists. I enter into this topic by first reminding us that World Economic Forum did its 2019 risk assessment, global risk assessments, and the health pandemic never featured amongst the 10 possible risks that the world should be looking out for. Therefore, it means that we are in a world where our capacity to anticipate risks is still a bit not there. And so a investment in the kinds of systems and using all the possibilities of algorithms and blockchains to begin to figure out what our post-COVID world would look increasingly more like is definitely something that borders on a lot of the use of the word innovation that I have heard this evening. So who are going to be the leaders in a better understanding what our next normal would look like, or our next normal, because the frequency of it takes us beyond the day after. It might just be the minute after. And so that pace of engagement in knowledge is going to be crucial. And I see that for my country and for our continent, we're going to suffer our first recession in 25 years as a result of the effect of COVID. Contrary to what the world thought, that Africa would be the greatest casualty in terms of fatalities, we just somehow managed to buck that trend. And what we have suffered more has been the economic impact of COVID. That has really created serious distress for the continent. And it also put a breaker to the commencement of the Africa Free Trade Agreement, which would have led to faster integration, economic integration of the continent. It was supposed to start by in July, and now it is postponed. But it really is the time that we need a scaled approach on our continent. This is the time when regional integration, regional trade, which is at less than 20% and does not compare favorably with even the lowest other region in Latin America, some 45%, should be ramping up. And so the first thing for us is how the African countries go back to the spirit that led to the treaty for regional integration through trade. That is a number one item of priority. A second point that I'd like to make is that for the big economies on our continent, the two largest economies, South Africa and Nigeria, it is indicated that a 1% growth in any of them leads to a 0.5% growth in the rest of the continent. So these economies are really important for recovery of growth on the continent. The decline of growth on the continent is already estimated to be the harbinger of additional 40 million people thrown into poverty. We're going to lose 5 years of progress that was made in the reduction of poverty to this. And that means there would be an accentuation of inequalities, both within and across in terms of Africa in relation to the rest of the world. So that really creates an important conversation for political leaders as well as for businesses in the countries, in the continent, as well as around the world. What is particularly troublesome is that the segment of society that is most affected by poverty, women and young people, are also the segments that are important for recovery. And unfortunately, many of the countries do not have sufficient fiscal space to enable the kind of investment that is necessary to help these two segments begin to recover. So domestic demand on the continent is going to be depressed for quite some time, especially when we remember that in terms of fiscal space, there is very limited of it, and then there is so much ratcheting of public debt that happened. And so debt distress is a potential across a number of these countries, especially the smaller ones. Now, all of these paint a picture that the continent may struggle for a while, and that whereas the rest of the world begins to recover, for example, what one of our colleagues just said about China, and China again roaring to provide a basis for growth for the rest of the world, the countries on our continent are going to take some time to adapt to the post-war, to the post-COVID realities. What then must we do? I think that that leads to my third point. My third point is that the opportunity in post-COVID is actually opportunity for deep structural reforms to happen. There are many sectors of our continent where the private sector needs to play a role. And all this while, government kept hugging those sectors to itself. And that's because political expediency was driving the extent to which governments were willing to pursue bold, courageous reforms. And so we're going to have to see that the situation just compels them to do it. I mean, it's almost a case of you just got to do these reforms because there is no alternative to reforms. And so the business sector being able to identify where these opportunities are going to come. When I look at sectors like agriculture and agricultural productivity that is stranded on a continent where 65% of existing global arable land is in. It then means that for many of the companies that are thinking of how to put to use the almost $13.7 trillion just that fled into safety, that are in negative yield portfolios around the world, these monies will ultimately have to find a way to earn better. And when they find a way to earn better would be to find destinations in our continent where the opportunities for good economic governance, good sound policy reforms are done. And my fourth point is that for our continent, when you look at what we have in terms of infrastructure gap, the infrastructure gap has to be filled. So there are two things that I see as very critical as a way of adapting to a post-COVID environment. When you think of smart cities are going to be huge. On the continent of Africa, we have just a handful of cities right now, and yet there is need to develop more cities because cities are going to create the basis for agglomeration of economic activities that would lead to growth. And so thinking in those terms, opportunities lie squarely in the infrastructure gap and the investments that would be necessary for it. And then I think my two last points are that we have to think of inequality as a global public bad. And when it's a global public bad, it has to be something that requires effort, not just on the part of state authorities as in government. Businesses need to pay a lot of attention to inequalities. The social license to operate in regions and provinces would very much depend on the smart behavior of businesses. And that's why when Johnson talked about some of the things that they are doing as a family-owned business, I was quite impressed by that. That's being strategic, that's being smart. So as we think of post-COVID and the deeper, sharper cases of inequalities, what are we going to do as public sector, private sector to address these challenges, which therefore means that discussing a new design of a multilateral order is something that the business sector cannot stay on the fringes. The business sector must be at the center of the conversation on the new multilateral order and how it is designed so that our global systems can drive a more equal kind of growth trajectory. And then my final point is that yes, capitalism has taken a beating, because even though it has created the best opportunities for growth and for improvement in well-being of people all over the world, we know that capitalism is broken, and that the best people to really question and scrutinize the ways to improve capitalism are going to be those who care about capitalism. I care about capitalism. I believe that talent is maximized and that we all do better when we provide that economic freedom for people to thrive. But we must be aware of the limits that we have seen and how to not make sure that those who are anti-capitalism now get the legitimacy to question everything that we see has worked so far for more people. We just need to figure out how to make this growth, this recovery more inclusive, more equitable, and in as much a way as possible, give people a sense they are part of this new world that post-COVID has handed to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Obi. Let me also, before our last speaker, let me just make sure that the audience knows that I think there's a question and answer tab on this Zoom program. If you want to have any questions to start thinking about the questions you want to ask of the panel while our last speaker makes his presentation, just remember that. So I would now call on Yuqiang Zhao to the last panelist to present. As you know, he's the representative of the United States of the largest bank in the world, the Industrial Commercial Bank of China, which has $4 trillion worth of assets and 600 million clients. So I would ask him to talk about his view of the world from where he stands as the banker of the largest bank in the biggest emerging market and the second largest economy in the world.
Thank you, Tim. I want to, first of all, thank you for Lode and the team inviting me into this panel. And I want to congratulate Lode and Cornel for your 10 years of the anniversary of EMI. It's a high pressure to work with our panelists, high profiled discussion. It's very good. So lessons learned for me as well. So I want to highlight mainly the part because with the COVID-19 impact and beyond. So because recently I've been studying that how COVID-19 had impacted the world, and some countries shows differences than the other country. Well, what is the way that looking beyond for the economic recovery as well as the country development? So I want to stay with a few keywords. The first is, so if we look at China and other countries as a comparison, what we can see and learn from the China regarding to the COVID-19 management. Well, the first important part, our panelists mentioned, I think it's very important, and I fully agree. There will be the strong leadership and with the vision of Chinese leaders, as well as the high effective decision making process and effort to be made to control the COVID-19 situation. While I do want to add one thing on, it's so very important to see, while the public and private relationships play a very important role in the COVID-19 administration part. Because if you're seeing in the world, I work in a part of my time in the Asia Society as well. In the Business Council, I actually move a motion to following the study that how public and private relationship we do differently in different countries under COVID-19 situation. So we know it's pretty important because to control the COVID-19 spread out, to control, the better manage the situation, you probably, the most of the important thing you want to remember is this is bilateral effort. This is everybody's will need to take importantly and understand why and how, what they should do, and together with the government, with the administration. And so public and private relationship is very important in the current situation. And so far, I think in China, the things are getting pretty good control. Well, second word I want to mention is the resiliency. I've had some observations regarding to the economic recovery and resiliency, that how in the current situation, the COVID-19 will impact in what industries, in what type of the economic, and how that will play a role, continue to impact the economic in the future. So the few key things I want to mention over here. Well, the first is regarding to the lessons learned from the crisis. Not only this crisis. I take China as a good example. That what is the lessons learned by China from all the crises. Start from the 1998 as the financial crisis in Southeast Asia. That's a strong license learned by China. And that's the time actually China to start to reform their financial industries. So ICBC as one of the largest bank at that time in China is basically nobody in the world at that period, and then turned to, from a state-owned bank, turn to a specialized bank, and then turn to a joint stock bank in 2005, and then get public in 2006. And since 2007, ICBC became the largest bank in the world. And it's steady growth in all the decades in line with Chinese economy. So why I mentioned that is the first lessons learned is financial stability. Many structural problems in the developing country, even though we fully believe that, growing up in emerging market it's very interesting to see, all the crises, how that we should respond to it, and how that we learn the lesson from it, and what we need to do to improve it. So in the first license in the Southeast Asia financial crisis, and China reformed the whole financial system. And then you see right now, among the 10 largest banks in the world, China took a follow. And ICBC is the #1 bank, according to banker right now, by the total assets, capital, everything. So financial strength. And the second license is also learned from the 2008 crisis. We know the crisis happened in the United States and then spread out to the world. What is that license learned? It's basically regarding to the vulnerability control of a skillful economic. So you see many countries over-relying one sector of the economic, over-relying manufacturing, over-relying energy, over-relying, for example, like the export will have significant impact through the 2008. And then what China learned is, China by that time, if we all remember, largely drive their economic growth by exporting the goods to the developed countries. And then it's the strategy change at that time, start from that time trying to more stimulating the domestic consumption, domestic manufacturing, and then move it forward with the reshape of the business. So now you see China's economic scale, even though heavily impacted by the COVID-19 situation, but China, according to IMF assumption, is probably the only country will have the positive economic growth after COVID-19 or during COVID-19 in one of the largest scale economic countries. So why that happened? I think because the government took a long vision, and the people and the industry, along with the economic rules, we always learn the lessons from all type of the crisis and what you need to do and how you can get it better. And the next word I want to mention is actually, or panel speaker mentioned as well, is equality and diversification. So while China is a country, basically we built everything decades ago from the bare scratch over there. So you see in recent years, in recent decade, what China been focusing on is education, trying to have the diversity in the labor market. So China right now have over 66% of the women labor in the market. That's basically the highest level in the skillful economic. And China had a education, there's a quarter factors. There's definitely the government efforts. And right now the education in China is in a very good ground. While the majority of the community will have the high school or above educated degree, and over 14% of the Chinese people in the labor will have the college degree. Well, in this year, 2020, in China, college students totally is about 30 million students right now in the college campus. So that's almost a small country, right? So the high educated people, equality as well as the diversity in the labor market and the whole overall environment, that's very important to the Chinese economic resiliency. Right now, China became the kind of the key or core of the manufacturing, like Apple, the others will have this manufacturing supply chain in China. Why? Because you need, in the Apple supply chain, I had the study before with a case study in supply chain for Apple in China for assembling, you will need over 7,000 engineers working on that line to get all the products finished and developed and moved to the export. So that's why that's crucially important to have the skill of the educated labor. And that's actually, it's the effort been a few decades. It's not a overnight thing that can happen, but that's why the emerging market, it's very important for the emerging market to learn those lessons, equity part, education, and diversity into their own economic policy. So the last other thing I want to mention is the financial stability. My team especially asked me to share the financial sector's impact into the COVID-19 and right now. I think under this situation, but I think we all knew that the financial stability is very important to economic, but why and how it became more and more important, even though in the world right now. So the first, in China's experience in the emerging market, the financial sector is more like a follower rather than a leader in the decades ago, because the financial sector is in the role to support a business and to get a business involve some of the manufacturing or something. But then it turned to the role change along with economic growth. The financial sector became more and more important, not only trying to support the business, but then trying to become the bridge, and then trying to be the partner, and then trying to be the leader of the whole economic growth. And right now, that's why right now, if you see Chinese economic and the financial industry play a very important role on it, and under the COVID-19 situation, the very important contribution from the financial industry is actually how they can work with economic, with a partner, with the manufacturer and the investor together to against the impact of the COVID-19. This not only happening in China, but also happening here in the United States. So in the United States, we have lost a lot, job. We have a lot kind of the industries are heavily impacted and having a really extreme pressure over there. But financial sector after 2006 and 2008 is very stable. So that's why the economic right now still have there's underlying strengths, because the financial sector has not been severely impacted, and they still hold this responsibility and accountable to resume their capabilities to support economic. If we have the similar issue, like in 2008 or before 2008, if the multiple happen over here, you will see whole disaster in, destroy the world in the United States right now. And the same thing happened in China. That's how the Chinese financial sector right now playing a very important role in supporting economic growth and supporting economic resiliency and vulnerability. And that's how the current situation, the economic side, will get control. But not limited to that. I want to mention especially right now, financial sector is playing all leading roles in different sectors. For example, we have Johnson, we have the people playing the leading roles in find a good, idea to invest, to became the incubator to some innovation. That's part of the investment banking activity, and many banks is running, including ICBC. We have 7 labs in that side. And in the commercial part, we do have some commercial loans, commercial facility syndication to support the operation. And then we do have the asset management in the back part of the economic and the financial sector. You have the asset management trying to bring the knowledge and advices to some more wealthy level, and to rebalance the financial input and the resource inward into the economic cycle. So that's how, with a healthy financial sector, you can bring an ecosystem with a more dynamic contribution to the economic, and as a return of their steady growth. And the first principle is always safety and stability that can remain. So I will post it here, and thank you. Share some personal opinions.
Thank you very much, all of you. I think it's been extraordinarily illustrative. We've actually been given 10 more minutes, and I had actually not originally, I don't want to talk about Mexico, because in fact, you probably know we have a collaboration with the EMI, Franklin Templeton. We send a monthly report on Mexico every month, so you can find all about Mexico. In fact, we're a classic contrarian situation. We've reacted, probably the worst reaction to the crisis, and we've got the worst record on COVID and the economy of any country in the world. So we're a classic contrarian opportunity, but I won't talk about Mexico. What I want to talk about is about the future of the world, and take together the negative scenario and the positive scenario. Negative points mentioned by several of you: the digital divide between the people who understand digitalization and people who don't, and between the rich and the poor, and between countries and within countries, etc. That's the negative point about what we're going through. I will give you the positive angle, which is actually implicit in Johnson's initial presentation, which is, and I've already presented to the panel actually in our discussions prior to this panel. We've had a very interesting email interchange, which is my comparison with the following 10 years, which we'll call the 2020s, with the 1920s. You may or may not remember that the 20s were called the Roaring Twenties. Now, what happened? The 1920s were preceded by World War I, which lasted from 1914 to 19, and the Spanish flu, which lasted from 1918 to 1919, where 50 million people died, which is exactly the same number of cases of COVID. Deaths of COVID, it's a horrible word to use, but we've only had 1.2 million deaths of COVID in the world, but we had 50 million deaths. Now, this is not dissimilar from the double whammy, which we're facing, because then it was economic because of World War I, and it was epidemiological with the Spanish flu. Now, the 1920s, why did they become the Roaring Twenties? Because it was partly relief reaction to what preceded, but also because of the widespread and rapid adoption of technologies which had been developed but not widely adopted before World War I. And I think the most important thing is electricity. I happen to have a family connection because my father-in-law's father was the founder of AEG in Germany, which electrified Germany in 1888 and became the huge conglomerate with telecommunications. And also my grandfather was a producer of turbines. My own father was the biggest producer of electric vehicles in the 1950s. So I happen to know a bit about that personally. But the point is that in the 20s, we had the development of all these technologies which had been but not adopted, and to do with telecommunications, radio, entertainment, movies, all to do with digital things, or they weren't digital, but electrical things. But we also had appliances. We had then the internal combustion engine. In combination with the reaction to the, which helped, we had this tremendous explosion of several industries and also the financial industry, to the extent that the Dow Jones went up 500% between 1923 and 1929, the index. Now, in the present time, I think we're going through the same process with digitalization, which has shown a certain effect on various industries. We've seen the beginnings of fintech. We've seen developments in biotechnology. We've seen developments in things like digital space age. We've seen also the tremendous collapse of the price of electricity. This isn't so much digitalization, but it's a combination of all kinds of tech. But my question to the panel is, and so the result could be a tremendous explosion in my view. I think one thing, because I think technology drives history. And I asked the panel, I think that with technology, we have the ability to simply abolish the informal economy to which Obi referred. And I think also, Hashim referred, he's talked about 30% of the economy in Egypt, about 50% of the Mexican economy is informal, but there's no reason why it couldn't be digitalized and everybody could become part of the digital economy. But my question to all of you is whether they could imagine a roaring 20s, the combination of the reaction to when we all get vaccinated, we'll be able to live normally. We'll be able to live beyond normal because we'll feel much freer, but also the adoption of all these new technologies. So I would like to open the question up to the panel to whether they believe in my idea of a roaring 20s. Who wants to answer the question? Okay, well, we've got Johnson raising a hand.
Okay.
Sorry, Obi, I'll go first. I'll be quick. I absolutely think that there's reason for optimism, especially with the, with the usage of 5G and better AI algorithms. I think that we will see within the next 5 years autonomous vehicles on the streets. We already see them delivering crucial supplies and products, and in China, on the streets, autonomous vehicles delivering these online ordered products. And I think that we will see a wide range of applications that is unlocked by 5G. And I think that will push the economy, that will drive GDP up by at least 1 to 2%. And I think that unlocks a lot of opportunities. And I think you're absolutely right and about everybody participating in the digital economy. I mean, let's take China, for example. Almost everyone uses, almost everyone with a smartphone uses either WeChat Pay or Alipay. I have been to China pre-COVID multiple times without having to bring cash at all, and I could live a life without a cashless life essentially. So I do agree that I think that if everybody gets plugged into digital economy, I think that unlocks a lot of potential. And secondly, I think that the onset of 5G, better IoT technologies, and better AI algorithms, better AI neural networks, I think those combined will push global economy growth up by 1 to 2% at least in terms of GDP growth.
Thanks so much. Any other thoughts from the panel on my thought, especially about the de-informalization of the informal economy?
I would go on that and say that whereas Africa missed a whole lot of other revolutions, we certainly didn't miss the ICT revolution. And that became our really first opportunity to participate in a revolution, because the mobile telephony on our continent is much more than something you talk with. It's everything. It's the asset that the poor have in their possession. And that as a result of this, the segments of young people who make up most of our continent, it's a very young continent at 70% of youthfulness, they rely on smartphones in order to build networks and communities and all kinds of economic corridors for themselves through technology. And it is in technology that we're seeing a whole lot of innovations emerging from our continent. So if you ask me where I come out, are you pessimistic about the world, especially looking from your continent, or are you optimistic about the world looking from your continent? I am really congenitally optimistic about my continent. I am optimistic because of the young, I'm optimistic because of the women, and I am optimistic because technology offers us a pathway out of the traditional approach toward gaining economic growth. And Timothy, the final point that I'd like to make is this matter of the deconcentration of a monopolistic structure of supply to the world. I think that my continent can make a pitch for, as a continent that is as close enough to Europe and other regions of this world, to be a good destination for investable capital. I think that what holds us back is good governance, economic governance, sound economic policies, ensuring that we have a better environment where the rule of law can be taken for a given. And I think that one thing that would help is the ascendancy of the office of the citizen. Citizens are more and more bolder to confront systems that are not serving them. The more that we see this, the better our democracy would be. And then the outcomes of better democracy would be sound economic policies, the right priorities of investment, and the kind of deregulation agenda that would support private sector roaring us back to a part of rapid growth.
Thank you very much. Any other? Yukian, please, go ahead.
Thank you, team. I just want really quickly to give you some figures to reinforce the opinions from Obi and the others. So the fintechs right now is playing a dominating role in China and the rest of the world right now, more in Asia. 10 years ago, before we have the digital era of the fintech in China, we have roughly about 300 million people is the active user of financial products. And right now we have over 1 billion people. It's the active user of the financial products. mainly including, the teenagers who's using cannabis.
1 billion out of 1.4 billion people.
We have 1.4 billion people, and right now over 1 billion is using that type of the financial tool. So that's how the fintechs bring the inclusiveness into the financial productivity, financial products usage. Thank you.
Great. Okay, Hashim, go ahead. The microphone.
Yeah, Tim. I believe that, first of all, I share Obi's optimism about Africa's technology adoption and the rate of adoption. But speaking about the informal sector, which is Egypt is suffering from the number of 70% of the economy is informal. I believe that technology is allowing access to the system to move them into the mainstream. But I believe that the biggest barrier is that people do not choose to stay in the informal sector because they enjoy it. They do it because for tax reasons.
Exactly.
That's number one. And the first thing that the government always think is that, okay, come inside and we'll tax you. So he's never going to come in, technology or no technology, as long as the government gives him the confidence that there are benefits from financial inclusion, that he has the right and the possibility to grow. And in our government here, they tried. I don't know about the success rate to give them access to finance, but actually the informal sector has its own circles of finance through families, through informal ways of finance. So I would imagine that it will take some time and it will take reforms from the government and thinking about it in an open mind, away from the trap of taxation. And as soon as they come in and they contribute to the economy, which they did, I mean, during the revolution of 2011, the only thing that kept the country going was the informal sector. And now we want to bring them back. So I would be very careful about that and the way to approach it.
Well, give them an incentive to want to be formal. That's what you do. Give them an incentive to want to be formal. Right now it's costly to be formal. So yes, businesses prefer informality. We have to, get governments to understand that domestic mobilization of resources will happen faster when we can have higher productivity businesses running on our continent. These politicians are having a free run. We need to make life difficult for them.
Absolutely.
I agree with you. Okay, everybody, apparently we have to stop at, I guess, in 1:55, so we have 10 minutes, but we have two specific questions for both you, Obi, and for you, Hashim, which are that we can type your answer, but there's a general question which I find extremely interesting, which is, which emerging markets do you think will finally emerge over the next few years? This is something which I've written about 8 books on the subject. So what do we mean? I mean, I think we all know what we mean by emerge. I think South Korea is the. So I leave Anindo has not had a second bite, so I'll give him the chance to say which economy would you think will emerge over the next 10 years? Yeah. Whatever we mean by emerge. And
I think I have a sense of the question, but a couple of things, right? So I think everyone's heard of the term BRICS, which was popular, 20 years ago, and how much we've evolved since then, right? BRICS were supposed to be the poster child for emerging markets, and now 20 years later, how China has grown, how India has grown, Brazil, etc. So, this is a little bit of a prediction. It's a little bit of a crystal ball. My sense is, and this is just my personal opinion, the India and Chinas of the world have become hugely dominant. There's still challenges, but they're kind of hugely a global force. But what I would encourage us to also look at is now the next tier, which are emerging now, but I think will come out very strong. The Vietnams of the world. Look at what they've done with COVID control, right? Look at Indonesia in terms of the use of technology, AI skills. Look at Malaysia in terms of learning. So there's a whole cluster specifically within ASEAN that's growing. And I truly believe that'll kind of be a huge force to reckon with, if you will. This is an Asia Pacific view. I'm sure there are others from Africa and Latin America as well. Just my perspective.
Okay, Obi, what about Africa? Which country will emerge first?
I think that political pressure would force the two major economies to embark on the kinds of reforms that will force them up the chain. South Africa and Nigeria will keep banking on them, but they have to sort out their political disaster.
South Africa and
Nigeria. And of course, our dear brother from Egypt knows that we're counting on Egypt.
Did you say Nigeria will come through too?
Nigeria will come through, South Africa will come through, because you see, what's going on is that there is a strong appetite among citizens for there to be a change in the quality of political outcomes that these countries, we now realize how much the politics of these countries are keeping them down. And this is the era of citizens, and the citizens are coming, and these young ones, I don't know if you followed the recent situation in my country. The young ones essentially just stepped up and stepped out there and said, enough is enough. We don't want this bad governance of our lives on a daily basis. That would count for something. And, you know, truly, if we can get our politics sorted, you know, you're going to get better policy. Well, you're going to get better economic policies. I'm huge on economic policies. And I just really want to see sound policies in South Africa, in Nigeria, in Egypt, in Ethiopia, those critical pillars of growth for the continent, and they would carry along the rest of the continent with them.
Johnson, you're the investor. You're the investor. Which countries are you betting on? Did you hear me? Sorry, Johnson.
Yes.
You're the investor. Which countries are you betting on that they'll emerge? We've got 3 more minutes.
I would always bet on China, but my portfolio is diversified. So we have been actively looking at ASEAN opportunities as well. It's hard to say which one will be sort of the winner, so to speak, in the coming 5 years. But I would say that betting on China and its growth would be a sure bet.
Johnson, don't miss out on Africa. I warn you.
If you want Latin America, but I wouldn't. But any other thoughts? What about you? Okay, Hashim, what do you think? What do you think?
I would not name a country because it all depends on the ability of a country to attract investments. And I would believe that investments are going to flow to countries that are least affected by the COVID-19. And with the deglobalization that is happening around, I would imagine that countries are going to be sourcing and the distribution and logistics that is more local and regional, and it's closer to the end market. And those countries who are able to have some political, economical, and social reforms to show themselves as a place where investment can land and a launching place for their export markets. I think these are the ones that are going to win. But I would never put my money away from Africa.
Okay, well, okay. Finally, Yu Chang, you've got 1 minute.
Right, sure. I'll be quick. I would say the first, I want to emphasize that for the next 10 years, it will be 10 years for emerging markets. So all the emerging countries will have the great opportunity to move it forward for the next 10 years. That's the first point. The second, I definitely agree with the Africa part. Africa is, in the future, will be the point of growth from long run. And in Asia, I think besides China, India, I agree that will be leading countries, and Pakistan, Vietnam will be an important market for growth as well. And I want to highlight Mexico, actually. Mexico will be the beneficiary in the future, in the next 10 years, because of the current, not only politically, the geopolitical issues, but also in the scale of economic population. Thank you.
Well, I'm delighted you ended the country where I'm sitting, but thank you very much to everybody. It's been an extraordinary learning. It's been an honor, as I say, and it's been a tremendous learning experience for me to be part of this panel, and I hope everybody's learned as much as I have from my colleagues on the panel. Thank you very much, Lourdes, the Emerging Markets Institute, for organizing this extraordinary experience. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you, Timothy. Thanks, everyone. It was a pleasure to meet you all.
Same here.
Thank you.
Same here.
We have to see you this time next year.
Absolutely. Hope we can all meet. Take care.
Yeah.
Physically, it's an extraordinary day because literally 10 minutes before we met, we discovered the result of the US elections.
I know.
What an extraordinary day and what an extraordinary event. Thank you very much.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Lourdes.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Maria, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. Thank you to Timothy Heyman for moderating this panel. This was a great way to close our amazing conference. And now I'm going to pass the floor to Lourdes, our energetic and restless director of the Emerging Markets Institute.